Welcome to Joe
Not
Abate's
yet.
Welcome to Joe Abate's Vintage Motocross Radio. We have a rank amateur host on the show today. My name is Warren Reid. I'll be interviewing the legendary Joe Abbate about all things motocross, vintage motocross, restoration, history, the icons, everything that I can fit into the show until he tells me to stop or shut up, whichever comes first. So, what we understand with this system is that anybody that wants to make a comment, you can make the comment, and if we may or may not click it and bring it up on live on the screen, depending on what comments you guys make. So keep them nice, keep them on topic, have a good time, and I'm looking forward to this. Probably, well, way more than Joe, because again, like I said in the opening, handing off your baby to a rank amateur, and it'd be like letting some junior ride my 125, works Honda. It just,
Warren, I'm sure you're going to do a fine job.
It's a scary thought for Joe, I'm sure. But anyway, what we're going to do on this show, we're going to dig deeper into the sport of motocross than a RC 500 on the starting gate at Carlsbad Grand Prix, the kind of trench that they dig when they take off. So we're going to dig deep with Joe. For you guys that just tuned in a minute or so late, again, this is Warren Reid interviewing Joe Abbate. We're reversing the roles. My first time with Joe on the Vintage Motocross Radio I was his very first guest last year. So yeah, thank you, Joe. That was a fun time. It kind of epitomized what I've come to know of you, of your knowledge of motocross, all things.
Thank you.
Excuse me, in that sport, and your ability to kind of bring it out in the people and ask the questions. I wrote down a bunch of questions. I'm thinking that we'll probably segue in and out of the ones that I wrote down as we go through. But regardless, we're going to dig deep into a lot of things that I think, in my impression and my knowledge of you and friendship with you over the years, are important to you with motocross and life in general. So you've interviewed a lot of really great and iconic people from the sport of motocross. You've been around it forever, and your depth of knowledge is just amazing. One of the things that I want to do is kind of, start off at where you're at right now at this very moment, which is you're at the Hopetown Grand Prix reunion, a race that I raced the very last year that they held it at Bob Hope's Movie Ranch.
Yeah, we are in Simi Valley at the Hummingbird Nest Ranch, and for the past, I think it's 5 or 6 years, they have had the Hopetown reunion. It was put on by the Zimmerman brothers early on. It's been taken over by Keith Mashburn, who's also the mayor of Simi Valley, and also quite a famous factory Yamaha road racer and dirt track guy. So we're here at the ranch, and I haven't been out there yet, but I understand there's going to be 200 or 300 bikes out there, a lot of people who are legends in the sport. And yeah, guys like you, Warren, who did race Hopetown way back when. I think it started in 1968.
Yeah, it really was a fun race, and you raced through the movie set, a lot of Western movie set town, and that was pretty fun. And of course, it's put on by the Dirt Diggers South Motorcycle Club, DDSMC, and like the DDNMC, the Dirt Diggers North Motorcycle Club, they always had a legendary mud hole at the Dirt Diggers race. So I'm sure you'll learn and find out a lot about that. And my early days. So when you talk about Keith Mashburn, being the host of it and a legendary motorcycle racer and the mayor of the area, he was one of my early heroes. When I first started going to racing, it was to Ascot TT, and the first time I saw Dave Aldana, he was an amateur practicing at Paris Raceway when they didn't even have a motocross track there. So the little kid watching all these guys and kind of dreaming. And Keith, I remember reading stories about some of the big races that he won, and I think if I'm not mistaken, he won the Great Bear Grand Prix when it really was a big event. I'm pretty sure that was him. I think as a 16-year-old. As a 16-year-old.
I think it was, Warren, and I was at Keith's house yesterday. He has a beautiful trophy case with all his helmets and different trophies in there, and I do believe I did see something that does correspond to your story, that he did win that race.
Yeah, good. So
we're expecting
to become Alzheimer's. So
yeah.
So anyway, let's first get started with all the race sponsors that the show sponsors that VMX uses. So the Motion Pro specialized tools and cables and controls. And again, the list that I'm going to go through, I know all these companies, having worked directly with them or seen how they operate and the kind of products they produce. And you've got quite a list there. Second, Vintco, keep the ride going. Full Circle Racing Limited, your one-stop shop for vintage and modern wheels. Preston Petty Products, the legend continues. I mean, the first thing I modified on my SL125 was a Preston Petty front fender with an aluminum, high-rise. Remember, they used to call them high-rise front fenders.
Sure.
Back before they became normal. and Preston was familiar with that. So, Golden Product. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if I could just interrupt you for a second, you just said Preston Petty, the legend continues. The legend himself, Preston Petty, will be here today. I'm going to try and get him on camera a little bit later on this afternoon.
Oh, good. Yeah, he was always a big supporter of motocross, his products, and he always said, sponsor contingency money at all the big AMA races for a long time. So he put back into the sport that he helped really create in a lot of ways. A former Suzuki factory motocross rider, Preston. Golden Products, the best fuel filter available for all types of motorcycles. Sunrise Vapor Blasting. And I've only just learned about that product in the last few years. And I'll tell you what, why anybody would bead blast anything anymore after seeing that stuff. So Northwest Mako CZ. I've ridden a Mako one time 5 minutes in my whole life, and I've never ridden a CZ. And
we learned something new today.
I am one of the Japanese bike kids that came along. Yeah. So anyway, Racer X magazine. Of course, we Scott Wallenberg and the Coombs we go way back, and they have a great publication there and great supporter of vintage motocross and all things motocross. And of course, a special thanks to Kevin Bridges and his beautiful wife, Penny, of the Dirt Diggers North Motorcycle Club, aforementioned. I don't know if they have a big mud hole at Hangtown anymore. It's probably been the obstacles reeled out. I know up at least through 79, Hangtown National always had a big mud hole. And 75 and other years, the whole track was a mud hole.
Yeah.
A lot of us.
Warren, an interesting tidbit. I think it was 1991 or 92. Hangtown is the only race that was actually canceled on the AMA national list due to rain. It had been a torrential downpour. They got one moto in, and they canceled the second moto. So that's the only race in AMA history that was actually canceled due to rain.
Yeah. And I remember who won the 125 class that day, winning one moto too.
Who's that?
That was Doug Henry. Privateer. Yeah. And then he propelled on to stardom from that. Was long after I retired, but I've still followed it closely.
Sure.
So let's get started with all the way back to the beginning of Joe Abbate. So without giving the identity thieves out there too much detail of the beginning of your life, tell us where and when you began.
In motorcycles or on planet
life? Yeah, like way back. I mean, don't give the exact date and time, but in hospital. But the
you know what, Warren? I am going to do that because it's an interesting little bit of a story.
Okay.
I was the first baby born in New Jersey in 1960. I was born 3 minutes after 12 in Beth Israel Hospital in Passaic, New Jersey, and at that time,
now I know how to say Passaic because
yeah. And somewhere I have it. There's a clipping of my mom and I. We had our picture in the paper, and that's where it all started. My picture was in the paper the day I was born.
And then she has a subparagraph, but I was in labor for 36 hours with.
Yeah, she was.
I was kidding, but yeah, that seems like typical. That finally after the next year starts, they're like, get this over with. So move on. So I have in here, I looked up, and you have Jeffersonville as your, like hometown in New York. And so I'd never heard of I'd heard of Port Jefferson, but never Jeffersonville. So I looked it up. It's on the edge of the Catskills. It's right near Woodstock. It's right near the Catskill Mountains, and it's not far from Unadilla. So pretty cool place to be from.
Yeah, and we moved up there when I was about 10 years old, and I went to school up there, grade school and high school. And I lived up there until about 1979. And yes, it is right near Woodstock. In fact, some of the kids that went to school with me took a bus from right where that property is to the school in Jeffersonville. And until this day, I have some friends up there, and I go back a couple of times a year to see them. And it's about an hour and a half, 2 hours from Unadilla, which anybody who's watching the show and is a motocross enthusiast knows that Unadilla, perhaps one of the greatest tracks in the world. And that's really where I discovered motocross at 14 years old. Some guys a little bit older than me who were involved in motocross said, we're going to Unadilla on Sunday. Do you want to go? And I said, yeah, sure. And it was a funny story, Warren, because at that time it was a Trans Am. It was 1974. And I had just got into dirt bikes and not really motocross at the time. I was only 13 or so, 14. And we went to Unadilla. Now, I didn't even know what a Trans Am was. So I'm there and I'm seeing, and it was incredible. You don't know what, the history that you're going to be seeing at that time. But at that race, I got to see Roger DeCoster, Heikki Mikkola, and so many Europeans at that time in the golden era, as they say. And the one thing I was really interested in after everybody was talking about Roger and Heikki was, who's the American guys? Are any Americans going to win here today? What's going to happen? And it was at that time that I learned that Jimmy Weinert was from Middletown, New York, not too far from us. And Brad Lackey was the American hopeful who had been racing some Grand Prix at that time, already had about 3 or 4 years on it. 3 or 4 years in on the GP circuit. So I kind of became a Weinert and a Lackey fan that day at my first Trans Am, but I didn't even know what I was watching really.
Well, and when you found out that Weinert was just down the road in Middletown, New York, did you make any trips down to the Weinert motorcycle shop?
I didn't, Warren. You got to remember, I was only 14 or 15 at the time. I wasn't driving yet, but just to go fast forward for a second, many, many years later, I think it was 2001, I restored a YZ360, and I wanted Jimmy Weinert to see it so badly. I put it in the back of my truck one day, and I went up to Weinert Scrapyard, and Jimmy was there. And, well, let me put it this way. I thought he'd spend about 10 minutes with me. Next thing you know, I got the bike off the truck, and it's the middle of winter, and we've got it inside this little cabin-like shed. And he's got a fire going, and we're having coffee, and Weinert and I are talking for like 3 hours.
Is that when he was still chewing and spitting? He'd spit on the floor?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was there, and because that's right after I moved back east from California, and I covered New York. So I looked up Weinert. So whenever I was passing through to the, up to Albany or to, somewhere in the Catskills or any of the Hudson Valley, I'd stop into Middletown and shoot the breeze with Jimmy and heard the backstory on lots of very famous events. Of course, everybody remembers the iconic picture of Weinert coming up under Tony D when Tony D was riding the 74 CZ.
Yes.
For the 500 championship. And that picture captured Jimmy Weinert perfectly. And his personality is exactly like that picture. So his whole life. And I love Jimmy, and, we were teammates and for a while there at Kawasaki, and he was, I was kind of a little kid coming up before I made it. And Jimmy was really helpful to me and just nice and friendly, and, he didn't give me riding technique tips because he wasn't really a very good rider, but he was fast and he won races.
two-time national champion, a Supercross championship. Jimmy did a
three championships. You did, you can't argue with success. So
yeah.
So first time you ever raced a dirt bike, and what was it and where was it?
The first time I ever raced on a track was at Ellenville, New York. It was a track called Mount Cathalia. That's about an hour and a half or so out of New York City. That was April of 1976. The first new bike I had was a YZ125C. I worked my butt off the year before with my dad in order to get that bike. And I also worked in a grocery store and pumped gas so I could pay for all the gear and the helmets and all the other things that went along with racing. But that was my first race, 125 novice, April of 1976.
Oh, great. How'd you do?
Warren, I got the whole shot in my first race. And
wow.
I led for like a lap. I was so panicked. I had never really been on a track in a race. That was the first time.
Yeah.
It was a rubber band start, and I'm sure I cheated due to nerves. But anyway, by the time that rubber band snapped, it was just about hitting my front number plate. And I led for a lap or two, and then, these guys are coming at me, and that was that. Back then, there were so many 125 amateurs. You had to qualify. There was probably 3 heats of 40 kids. And, they narrow it down, as you know, 10 from each heat to make a main. And I didn't qualify that day, and it took me a little while to qualify throughout that summer. But that was my first race.
Oh, good. So you raced all over New York State, and a lot of those tracks I know of, even if I didn't race at them. So
yeah, and some of them are still there today. There's Diamondback. There was South Woods in Monticello, Ellenville, as I mentioned. Walden Playboys is still around.
That's the one I remember.
Yeah, and there were a few others. I didn't race in New Jersey at that time. The only track I remember in New Jersey back then was Raceway Park, and it was just too far to go at that time.
Raceway Park is Englishtown, right?
Englishtown, yes.
Yeah, so that's a drag strip, and they have a motocross track. Do they have other kinds of race? Okay.
Yeah.
I went out there one time and watched a race when I was living back there. So so here's something interesting. I'll let you tell the story of the first time we met and how it came to be. And it was and not at a race, but it did involve racing. And I was working for Honda at the time and living in Pennsylvania, and again, covering the Northeast. And so I'll hand it to you from there to take over. So,
okay. Billy Grossi, everybody knows Billy from the Kawasaki Honda years. He was racing vintage bikes, and he took a spill and broke his leg. And Billy, of course, had been out of motocross for a very long time. He's a tile setter. He's married, has a beautiful family, and now he can't work. So Warren and a couple of other guys decided to start selling some things on eBay to raise money for Billy Grossi. And Warren put up this beautiful mug, this Bel-Ray mug. His name was on it, but only people from that year who were either sponsored by Bel-Ray or there was some special race, all their names were on the cup, and then only the people whose names are on the cup have it. So Warren put up the cup on eBay, and I bid on it. And Warren was nice enough to actually meet me in Connecticut when he worked for Honda. Oh, no, I think we met in New York State, just over the border.
Yeah.
And Warren brought the cup to me, and we had a nice dinner. And that was really the first time that Warren and I met. And that was one expensive cup of coffee, I'll tell you. I still have that cup.
No, good. That's a great. There weren't a lot of those. And again, as you said, if the name's on it, that means you were there and you got the cup. If you have the cup and your name isn't on it, you probably weren't there.
I wasn't.
Yeah. So they really were a collector. I had a couple of them because some people didn't show up, and their cup went to my house after after the banquet was over. But those Bel-Ray banquets were really a fun event, and Billy was always a big part of the Bel-Ray family and everything. And one of the guys that I looked up to, he was a few years ahead of me, kind of in the entering the racing scene. So no way I wouldn't help. So that was a good thing. And I also learned there that Joe Abbate knows how to pick food, how to order food. He is a food expert as much as he is a motocross and vintage motocross bike expert. So I'm looking forward to one of these times when I'm out in California and you pick the restaurant. Okay.
In California?
Yeah. And I'll pay.
Okay. That's a
my
fair.
wife's not in the room, so she didn't hear me say that, but I'll pay within reason. Okay. Don't bankrupt me. But
no, I won't. In fact, I just discovered a new restaurant that I really like. Probably one of the best ones out here. It's in Danville, and I'll take you there.
Oh, good. So we're looking forward to it. So let's see. What do we have here? You got your racing. Okay. The big races you watch. You told me about the Trans Am at Unadilla, but I'm sure you went to a lot of other big races. They finally had a Supercross at the Meadowlands, right? So,
you know what, Warren? Actually, I didn't. For those years that I lived in Jeffersonville, New York, I did go to Unadilla every year. But other than that, I didn't attend any other races at that time. And when we moved out of Jeffersonville in 1978 or 79, and I moved back to New Jersey, motocross was the furthest thing from my mind. I didn't have a bike anymore. I didn't really follow Supercross. I didn't make that race at the Meadowlands. I didn't really start going to see races again until I got back into vintage motocross in 2000, 2001. And then, even then, I was only watching it on TV. I didn't start going to Supercrosses till I moved to California, which ironically was 12 years ago today.
No, that was the question I was going to ask. So the one of the things that was interesting I went to watch the Meadowlands Supercross. That was real funny because my kids were very young at that time, and we met. My stepdad was there, John R. He was working on all the suspension for all the the Yamaha team guys, and it was real funny for my daughter to see her Papa John R. at a motorcycle race on the eastern part of the country instead of at his house in California. And I remember when I was watching the race, I was looking for the Jimmy Hoffa double jumps, but they didn't have them. They didn't have my kind of sense of humor, but I was.
No. And you know what? The Meadowlands, that arena and the stadium itself, they're gone now and they were torn down. So there's a new stadium, and it doesn't look like old Jimmy popped up when they dug it all up. So.
When they dug it up. So, we could speculate all day long. So one thing that I'm always, I notice a lot, and, being a family guy myself, and I see it with you, a moto life is not always an easy life, whether it's racing or deeply involved in the sport, because it's such a passionate kind of undertaking of the people that do it. But you and Sue have, been together for a long time, and you go through all those kind of trials and tribulations of, running a motorcycle business of whatever type, whether it's a racing or working on them or developing products. So, right. I've seen that from your end is pretty close. So I'll let you.
Well, Sue and I have been together. It'll be 35 years in October. And how the vintage motocross thing came about was, and I don't know, you may have questions about this, you may not, I don't know. But
I probably do and will, but I'll skip them when we come to them if you hit them now. So
okay. How I got back into the vintage scene was in 1995, a couple of friends of mine decided that they were going to buy quads. And they said, come on, we're going to the Yamaha shop. We're buying Banshees, and this is going to be great. So I went to the shop with them, and I just could not bring myself to buy a quad. It wasn't my thing. And this is.
You stayed friends with them?
Yeah, I still am. So at that shop, I wound up buying a new YZ in 1995. And I went out and I tried racing again. Of course, this is modern racing, 1995. It didn't really suit me, but one thing I learned while I was doing that throughout that summer was that there was something called vintage racing. And I got a newspaper. It said that there was a vintage race at Diamondback. And at that race, I didn't race. I just went to watch. I bought a CZ 250 that day.
Wow.
But I was growing a business on my own at that time. I was in the leasing and finance business. I used to lease and finance cars, trucks, and equipment. And I just didn't have time for vintage racing. Over that course of the next couple of years with the leasing business, I began to suffer from panic disorder and anxiety. And I had suffered with depression most of my life, but it went undetected. I didn't talk to anybody about it. I just thought I was having a bad day and things are going to get better. And they didn't. And what happened was, as my business grew and it got to be more successful, the weight came down on me that I'm still not happy. And just sitting at my desk one day, my body began to vibrate and my head just felt like it was going to explode. And that was it. My depression had turned into panic disorder, anxiety, and it got worse over the next couple of years. I had to go to therapy. They had me on Zoloft, which didn't really work that well, but I went through a lot of years of therapy. And during that time is when I created Joe Abate's Cycle Therapy. That's how that came about. And that was it for the leasing business. I sold it. I went home. Susie had a great job. And I just began around 1998, 99, fooling around with old dirt bikes. Then I started to restore them. Then I started to race in 99. And by 2001, I started taking in work and restoring bikes for other people while we lived in New Jersey yet.
Wow. And so what you described is different, but the same as so many people that motocross has just filled a spot in their life to make it, it gives them a productive, fun, and certainly fun thing to do, and devotion to, and direction that helps them. And I've always, said that if John R. and my stepmother and my wife hadn't come into my life, man, you would have been hearing about me in the paper, but it wouldn't have been for anything good. I could tell you that. So, and John R., fit in the motocross thing so perfectly that motocross was all I thought about. And I can, relate to it. And sometimes people are surprised when I tell them the most stressful time of my entire life was my senior year, graduating, getting ready to go my second year on the Nationals. And John R., who always was there to get information from, to work on my bike. Now, I'm sponsored by FMF, but it's not the same, and he went to Europe to work on Marty's Grand Prix effort bike. And I had to take all my finals, graduate, and get ready to leave for the entire summer to race Nationals and go to my wife's prom and all that stuff, and man, I was going nuts. It was,
and I think, Warren, what maybe people think about it, maybe they don't, but whether it's you or Marty Smith or Brad Lackey or Jim Pomeroy or whoever it may be, that's your job. You got to get out there and you've got to produce. It's not all about getting paid from FMF or your sponsor and wherever you finish, because you're only as good as your last race.
That's right.
So
when
it's a lot more to it.
Yeah, when you line up on the line, you have to. Everything else has to be put aside, and I think that kind of forcing the motocross does is it forces you to put those things away, not forget about them or not deal with them, but reconcentrate your efforts to the point that everything doesn't keep manifesting to get to a DEFCON 1 or something. So, and that's interesting. So, one of my questions is, moving from New Jersey to California and getting a business started. So that's a big deal. I know what it was like moving from California to Pennsylvania, and that was as extreme of a culture shock as, the other way around, I'm sure.
It wasn't as difficult as maybe some people think. Mostly because when my first trip to California was in 2003, and then I came back out here again in 2008, both Susie and I. But by 2008, I had become friends with Marty Smith and Brad Lackey and a few other guys. And you know how it is when you don't live here and you see them at a race, they'll say, well, when you come to California, make sure you call me. But, we all say that. Make sure you call me when. But I did do that, and it was 2008, January of 2008. And Susie and I decided to come out here for a couple of weeks. And I did call Marty and Nancy, and we wound up staying down at Marty's house for a while. And I went to the Anaheim Supercross with them, and then we drove up the coast, and then we stayed with the Lackeys after that. And we thought we'd love to live in Northern California. So we went back. Our son was going to get married August 8th of 2008, and we had been in our house for about 25 years. So the kids are married, everybody's out, and we sold our house. And by then, the market had taken a huge dive. So we came out here in 2008. We bought a house today, June 27th, 2009.
Oh.
And that was it. The market was like half of what it was when I decided to move here. So we bought a house, and that was it. I started restoring bikes in my garage. Susie was retired, basically. And that's what we did.
There you go. Oh, and yeah, well, you did the opposite of what I did. You sold high and bought low. I sell low and buy high.
Yeah. Well, things have changed for me a little bit in the real estate market too. I'm not in that house that I was anymore, but it's all good. We're still here and everything's going great. And I miss my family back in Jersey and most of my friends there. But other than that, I don't have any regrets of ever moving to California.
So one of the things that you specialize in the restorations is fuel tanks, and the and you may have seen other things that I've said. Maybe I said it with you on the interview, but I was all set to be a fabricator myself until I got a factory contract, and I painted my own helmets, and I made my own pipes, and I look back and think of how much money I could have made if I stayed like FMF or stayed like Troy Lee and done helmets or pipes. But I was an idiot. I signed a factory contract. So anyway, when it comes to working on the gas tanks and fabricating, and I even converted a gas tank in my auto body class into a planter. I took a CR125 tank and cut it open and made it into a planter. So it was pretty cool. But
I have one of those too.
Did you? Okay. I saw somebody, maybe you were that made the original one. I just copied it in high school. But when it comes to rebuilding a tank, other than, the plastic tanks that everything is now, you got I'll start naming off some types of tanks and you can comment on them. And so first off that I think of is the Spanish brands and the Rickman fiberglass tanks.
Right.
The color, the fine finish, everything.
Well, Warren, back when I got started in New Jersey, it was a little bit of a different environment, the way my garage was and stuff like that. And I would paint tanks and I would work on fiberglass, which kind of leads me back to where, getting into the restoration of the bikes. Before I met Susie and we got married, I was buying and selling Corvettes on my own. I was always a Corvette guy. And I had one, I sold it, I bought two, and I was good with my hands. And I began to do a little body work, a little fiberglass, spent a little time with a friend of mine at a body shop, not a long time, like a week or so.
Yeah.
And he taught me a few tricks. And so I would do some painting back then. In California, it's not so easy. It was a different environment. So I no longer paint. But throughout that time, I enjoyed working with aluminum more than painting and certainly more than working with fiberglass. And I'm sure it's going to come up in the conversation, maybe in this segment right here. You're going to want to know about the Elsinore tanks, I guess.
Well, that's the one the closest to my heart. So, tell us about the aluminum, because that's the next one on the list. So the shape, the various shapes, aluminum tanks, and then the custom tanks, the Mako, coffin tanks, and CZ kind of peanut tanks, and
around 2002 or 2003, someone gave me a CR250 to restore. And it got down to where everything is done, but that tank still has a dent in it. And there isn't anybody at that point. Yeah, it must have been 2004. There wasn't anybody at that point who's restoring or taking dents out of these tanks. Now, granted, there may have been people who had experience with panel beating, as they say. It's an old English term, and they would be able to do that, but I didn't know about it. So I courageously took a Dremel with a little cut-off wheel on it, and I cut a little U shape behind that dent, and I bent that aluminum back, and somehow I got in there with whatever tool I had, and I began to pry away at that dent. I was rather confident in doing it, mostly because of the fiberglass work I did. Because when you're working with fiberglass and resin and body fillers, you got to be really good with the sanding. Yeah. Otherwise, the job doesn't come out that good. So I'm going to try this. And I did. And only God knows how it came out. It probably didn't come out as good as I thought it did at the time. But that's when I did it, and I got to doing it more and more. And then I started to remove the whole tunnel in tanks. And it's kind of come full circle to where I'm back down to fixing those dents in the Elsinore tanks through a hole about 3/8 of an inch with some special tools that I built myself. Some of them are very archaic. Some of them are just nothing more than bent rods and bent bolts and pieces of rebar. But it gets the job done, and that's what I do.
Well, yeah, and there isn't an Elsinore out there that doesn't have a ding in it, in the tank. So at least the 250, the aluminum tank. So yeah, they all had them, even all the way up through 79. So
sure,
yeah, those things. And Honda always had pretty tanks. Even they take the style and everything of their fuel tank pretty seriously. So besides the tanks, I want to ask you about steel and chrome tanks. I
don't do anything with chrome like a Hodaka tank. Chromers are very, very difficult to find in California. There are other places that do it, but I have an expression: stay in your own ghetto, and my ghetto is aluminum. So there are guys out there that do steel tanks and they do rechrome them and offer that service. I don't really do that. I will do a steel tank on a bike if I'm restoring the whole bike. And I'll do it the same way I do the Hondas. I'll either cut the tunnel out or I'll drill a hole in there and work out the dent. But it takes too much time to do the steel tanks. And I don't really enjoy that medium, so to speak. I like aluminum. I like to cut it. I like to file it. I like to sand it. I love everything about it.
So did the guys that do steel tanks, did they ever get caught stealing them or
sealing them?
I'm kidding.
Oh, I don't.
So sorry.
I don't know.
Yeah. So when you're restoring old bikes, and how do you determine if it's a classic? Is it a classic because it's been identified in kind of the vintage industry, or is classic just because that bike means something to a particular bike to a particular person?
You hit the nail right on the head, Warren. It's a sentimental hobby for a lot of people. It's not a matter of what the bike is worth or whether it's collectible. But if a guy says my first bike was a Honda XR75 or a Hodaka or a 74 YZ250, that's the bike he wants. So I don't really restore bikes on speculation. I don't buy bikes, restore them, then try to sell them. So I don't get into that. But when somebody comes to me and they want a bike restored, well, that's the bike that's important to them. Now, I will have a conversation with them, obviously, about what the restoration is going to cost, what will the value of the bike be in the end. But most of the times, they're not concerned with that. What they're concerned with is the nostalgic side of the restoration, how important that bike was to them in their life, and that's what they care about.
Yeah. So I'm sure you've had a 3 or 4 that really kind of stand out in your mind that you're exceptionally proud of how it came out, or how it met that feeling that the customer wanted, or that you wanted to get out of it. Any a few that stand out there?
Yeah, I did a 66 or a 67 Greaves for Clark. His first name escapes me right now, but his last name was Clark. Okay. And I had never really put my hands on a Greaves before. I didn't really know that much about them. And I learned so much along the way during doing that restoration. I didn't know how that big aluminum beam, which comes down the front of the frame, how is that aluminum beam attached to the steel frame? And I learned that it was actually cast into that frame. It was molten aluminum that they cast into the steel, and just a lot of other really great things that I learned about that bike from the early end, which is not as heavy as some people think, with that twin shocks, with the two shocks on the front.
Yeah.
And just so many other little interesting things. The Villiers motor, the Albin transmission. Just so much of it was a journey for me, and the bike came out really great in the end. So I remember that one. There was an RM 370 that I did for a guy in Southern California. That one turned out really great because I tried to make it like an RHRN replica, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't like to say a rider's name and a replica, like a DeCoster replica. I don't like to do that. If I'm going to make something that's going to be a replica of a factory bike, I just like to call it what it is instead of attaching someone's name to it. So I always called it the RHRN inspiration, because that's where the inspiration came from to build a bike. That one came out really great too. So
yeah,
it's Tim Clark. Tim Clark is who I did.
I know the name. I'm trying to remember if I'm sure we've met or crossed paths at some.
You have. He was a journalist, I think, for a long time. Did a lot with photography too.
Okay.
He was involved in different dealerships throughout the country.
Oh, DeCoster during the Trans Am series when I was in high school, he would American Suzuki was nearby Saddleback, and Roger would practice at Saddleback during the week while the Trans Ams are going on. So during the Trans Am series after high school, we'd drive to Saddleback Park and watch Roger DeCoster practice at Saddleback. And it cost us, and at that time of the afternoon, they didn't charge you to get in. They just let you go in, And so you get to watch Roger practice for free.
Yeah.
You try to explain that to kids a little bit nowadays. How do you learn to do this? Well, you watched and you tried it and you copied, and it's the same thing as people that become expert at mechanical and fabrication and finishing like yourself. It's the same thing. You know how something is supposed to turn out, so you just keep doing what you need to do to figure out how to make it get to that point. Whether you're picking somebody else's brain or reading it or or just diving into you get it.
Warren, what a lot of people don't realize is whether it's Monet or Van Gogh or even musical artists, all artists steal from each other, and don't let anybody tell you they don't. Okay. So when I go to a show or I go look at bikes, whether it's in the Tom White collection or Kelly Owens or wherever it is, I take my phone, I take pictures because something looks better than the way I've done it before, or if I'm working on that bike or I'm going to be working on it in the future, I take pictures of it and how it looks. So yeah, we're all little thieves, and I don't care who you are, the biggest names in the industry, whether it's music or painting or restoration people, everybody steals from each other quietly. We don't just make a big deal of it, but we're all stealing from each other in some way.
And motocross riders are exactly the same, because you have to watch what your competition's doing. And if they're doing something, better than you, or even if it's different, it's still another, arrow in your quiver, to use at some other point. And and you have to pay attention all the time. And I commented sometimes that I've learned a line on a track watching an intermediate race that some intermediate took on accident. Sure. He took it on accident. I could tell he did it on accident, but it clicked in my brain. You know what? That might work.
Yeah.
If you just do it like this and this, it's maybe not every time, but it's another option. Because as you know, if you follow people all the time, you can't pass them. You have to. Even the people you learn from, you have to do it a little bit different. And then that's how race. That's how the United States progressed from nothing in '67 in motocross to '81, winning the motocross and trophy to nations, in '82, repeating and winning 2 of the 3 world championships. That's, in soccer, we've been messing around with soccer for 100 years and we still can't even get past the first round in the World Cup, I mean, for crying out loud.
Warren, I've asked some of my guests in the past too, racers, what did you see somebody do when you were just getting into the sport of motocross? What did you see somebody else do that, changed your mind? I asked that question a lot of times to a lot of racers who I have on the show. I may have even asked it to you during your first interview.
Yeah. Everybody like that, right? So, so you're, which leads right into the next question that I had, was interviewing some of these iconic people. And this was kind of along the lines of the question that you said that you would ask them. And the question I had for you is, what are some of the most surprising things that you learned from or about some of those guys that you interviewed, over the course of years, but certainly on VMX radio for the last year? Right.
Some of the more interesting things that I've learned about them are things that surprised me.
Yeah, either or.
A couple come to mind. Mary McGee. Now, many of us know the Mary McGee story. For those that don't, Mary, of course, was a beautiful gal growing up in the 50s. She wanted to race cars, and she did that. And then she went on to race motorcycles. But I didn't realize that, how can I say it? There were some equality stumbling blocks along the way. Us being guys and being racers, we just want more people to race. But I didn't realize that there were men out there who would prefer that Mary McGee did not race with them. So it kind of confirmed that there were those problems. Okay. But she went on to overcome that, and many girls after her went on to race and had some incredibly successful careers. Sue Fish, who was a guest of mine, Doreen Payne. In fact, I have Nancy Payne coming up July 12th on the show, but that's another story. Getting back to your question, what were some other things I've learned? Scott Harden, an incredible enduro international 6-day trials rider.
I know.
Him telling me that he was racing in Africa, and he was supposed to be heading toward Egypt, and he went across the border and wound up in Libya in the early 1980s. Reagan's president. Libya is not a real big fan of anything American at that time, and he did have to get into a truck to get back to where he had to be on his course. He said he knew enough of the language that he got by, but he didn't say too much. So I learned about those dangers as well. And I don't know. There's something that came from everybody's interview that I've done that you take away, and there's always a little bit of a surprise. Yeah. No matter.
Scott Harden and Danny Laporte and Randy Morales and I teamed up for a 4-man 24-hour motocross race in France.
Really?
Yeah, it was. Anyway, it was really, really fun, and Bernard Hinault, the multi-time Tour de France champion, was kind of like our team mascot or leader or whatever, and we got to go to his house. I didn't know Bernard Hinault from Adam. He multi-time Tour de France. I'm like, the bike race, right? Anyway, it was. I was riding wheelies on his training bike down his driveway, and didn't think nothing of it. And then, years later, I'm, into cycling, and I'm like, well, that's pretty cool, riding wheelies on Bernard Hinault's training bike down his driveway in France. Anyway, but Scott and Danny and I and Randy Morales passed away. We had a great time over there, and even the bike broke. That's the one time I raced a KTM, and it was, but the bike broke, and we didn't finish, and so it was the middle of the night, so we just went back to sleep and toured Paris. So, have you gone over to Europe for any of the Nations races or anything that have been over?
I have not. I have been to Europe. but I did not see any motorcycle racing there. I went on a cruise. In fact, it was a year or so after I moved to California. Brad and Lori invited Susie and I to go on a cruise with them from Spain, and it was going to leave Spain and go around Italy. This is great. But Brad, in his infinite wisdom of always planning 3 things while doing one thing, says, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go to Belgium for a week before we go to Spain to get on the boat and take a cruise around Italy. So when I was in Belgium, I did get to go to the track where Namur was with Brad. We did visit George Joe Abbate, which is a great story too. But I did not see any racing. I've not seen any racing.
Well, seeing Namur was almost like a pilgrimage, I would think, right?
Yeah, it was.
I remember one conversation that some of us were talking to Roger about something, and he made the comment that, and this was before Danny had passed away or before he'd gotten hurt, and he said, if Danny raced at Namur, they'd take him home in a box. That that kind of aggressive style just would not survive.
Yeah,
on the cliffs, on the side of the track that track had. I've seen pictures. It was pretty crazy. So that must have been super fun, I would think. And so, now going around Italy, were you kind of like the tour guide for Brad and Lori when you guys went around Italy, or? Yeah.
Nah, I wasn't really the tour guide, but I can get by a little bit with the language, not much. Yeah. But as you suggested in the beginning of the show, Warren, I know all about the food. I know how to order food.
Okay, good. I'm looking forward to it. So, so I just have some basic questions that seems to be big debates all the time in the motocross thing, and there's a few people that post online that kind of dig it in a little bit and get the things going about that. But the first, 2-stroke versus 4-stroke.
Right. What's the question?
That is the question.
What goes around comes around, Warren. Back in the early 60s, you had guys on the Lidos and the Monarchs and the BSAs, and it was all about the 4 strokes. And then all of a sudden, 2 strokes come about. They're lighter, they're faster, they're easier to work on. And then things change again. We're back in that 4-stroke era right now. It's not. How can I say it? I'm over it. Okay, I don't need to see 2 strokes out there at modern races. And no, I mean, to each his own. I'll always be a 2-stroke guy. That's what I like. That's what I like to work on. That's what I like the sound of. And that's where that goes for me. So to each his own. Nobody's right. Nobody's wrong.
So the visceral feeling is 2-stroke. The watching the racing, you don't have any preference whatsoever. So the next one is it's a similar question, and it's electric versus piston.
Completely different thing, Warren. Where there's no gasoline and no pistons, it's just not the same. Now, I'm all for it as far as environmentally, it being maybe a way to open up more places to ride. I think it's great that a lot of kids are getting their start on electric bikes, which could lead into dirt bikes, trail bikes, and the sport growing more. I've ridden electric bikes. It's a lot of fun. There is something missing. You feel like the pinball wizard when you're on there. You're a deaf, dumb, and blind kid. Something's going on. It feels right, but you can't hear it.
Yeah,
certain things you can't see. But
you can't smell electrons, right? Unless they're burning a wire, you can't smell them. So
exactly. So I do support it. I think it's a great thing, and I think it could be a way to bring people into the trail bike, into the gas engines as well.
And that's the way I kind of look at it. I'd like to see electric more than a mountain bike is, but less than a motorcycle is. There needs to be somewhere in between. They don't need to be these big, giant, bulky things anymore, I don't think. And
right.
So I'd like to see them incorporate a flywheel and a clutch into it, because I think there was a lot of control that I think riders develop over the years where they can rev up the engine and in fact the flywheel, and they can control, so it's spinning and causing a gyro effect of one type, and then they can control how much of that's delivered by a clutch.
Yeah.
Well, with an electric, you can't get a flywheel spinning. You either induce torque or you don't. And anyway, that's one of the things I'd like to see with it. I think I liked to sometimes get the thing revving up and control all the delivery with a clutch. I could have more control with a clutch than I could with a throttle. So anyway, that's my thing. So Supercross versus motocross.
Once I learned that there were two different things completely, I began to enjoy Supercross a whole lot more. I don't miss a race on television when it comes to Supercross. I get to hit quite a few of them living here in California. Occasionally, I'll even catch one in St. Louis or Florida, Texas, if I happen to be in that area. So I try and, if I'm going to take a trip or something, I do try and plan it around the Supercross schedule. I just love watching it on TV, and but I don't really have a preference. You know, we have so many people on Facebook with so many opinions who always look to either engage people in a conversation to make that comparison. But I'm not one of those guys. I love indoors. I love outdoors, and I'm good with all of it.
Yep. Natural versus bulldozer.
Natural.
All right. Ruts versus big bumps.
As a rider, or
either way, from a spectator or as a rider. So,
well, on the vintage bikes, the ruts don't bother me at all. You know, in fact, on a vintage bike, you're looking for ruts.
Yeah.
But you're not looking for whoops and bumps. You know, so it's one of those things, and it's the way we all look at a track as a motocrosser. How can I go fast here? What am I going to have to give up here in order to be faster in that section? So, no, I'm good with all of it. I'm not a real fan of sand. I don't really like riding sandy tracks. But,
really, New Jersey's got a lot of sand tracks. So, and so does upstate New York too. So.
Yeah, way upstate a little, but I'm more of a lone guy, more of the soft stuff.
Yeah. And here's one, and this seems to this kind of like the 4-stroke, 2-stroke thing of, you know, what's happening at the time, but Europe versus US.
Okay. Europe versus U.S. Where are we talking about in eras? Are we talking about where are we going with the U.S. versus Europe?
I'll leave that as broad. So whether it's the racing, GP racing, right, and you use Europe kind of broadly because it's all over the world now. The riders there versus here, the riders that race there and then come here, the riders that from other parts of the world that start off in Europe and then come here.
Yeah.
There's a lot to it. You know, I mean, that's the start of the sport. They're the ones that brought it here. And we took it back to them way more than they expected, I think. So,
yeah, we did. But now I really don't know how much GP riders make in Europe. But obviously, when you see the Roxons or the Ferrandas of the world come here to race Supercross or race in America, you know, it could be all about the money. But I guess their techniques change too. I would love to see an American rider go back and race the GPs and win another world championship for America. I thought maybe Villapoto was going to do that, but how can I say it? You know, Warren, tough times create stronger people, and then good times people get weak again. You know, when the Brad Lackeys and the Danny Laportes went over there and did it in the 80s, it created a toughness in America, and that toughness continued. And
yeah,
while they weren't world champions, you still had David Bailey, Danny Laporte, Chuck Sun, Donnie Hansen, and you had, of course, Trampus Parker, who was a world champion, a 2-time world champion. Bobby Moore, 125
right,
CP world champion a couple of times. But what happened was, I think the Supercross comes into the scene. It kind of softens the guys up a little. They're getting paid a lot of money, and they're just not interested in chasing the big cup anymore. So I don't know. I'd like to see it happen. Whether it happens or not, I don't know.
Hey, here's a one that it just came to me this morning when I was writing the questions down. So and I'm going to start asking. You're the first person I'm asking this, but we'll get this started. When is Asia, Africa, and South America going to start producing some talent? It seems to me they're making motorcycles in Asia. They're making them in Africa. They're making them in South America. They have manufacturing. They have plenty of people, and enough affluence that they can do it. Of course, we have out of South Africa, but there's a lot of multi-million people cities in Africa that and certainly in Asia that could be producing some talent.
Warren, I really don't have an answer to that. It's not even something. Look, you just said it's I'm the first person you're asking the question to. You just came up with the question on your own. So maybe with a little research or something, I could probably answer the question a little more in depth. But yeah, South Africa. The name Grant Langston rings a bell. Yeah. There's Greg Albertine. And as far as Asia goes, or some of those other countries, I don't know.
Yeah, and South Africa, I'm reminded that what propelled them is kind of like what the Europeans did with America. So with South Africa, Larry Wasik and Jim Tarantino and Rex Staten all went to South Africa and were very successful over there. And I think Jim is still there. Larry's come back, and I believe he married a South African woman, and doing very well. But it was after that the South Africans started becoming very competitive, and then with Australia, Jeff Lees came over here after Darrell Willoughby was the first Australian to come to America and really spend time in America, kind of learning the American way. And he went back, and then first Stephen Gall came after Darrell, and then Jeff Lees came and raced for a while. But that, then that really progressed those guys up. And then Chad Reid, of course, was the product of that kind of international motocross cooperation that happened, and so maybe there's something to it with that.
And you got the Lawrence brothers here now. They're from Australia.
Yeah, that's right.
Jet Lawrence and what's the brother's name?
Hunter.
Yeah.
Hunter,
so they're they're over here now. And as far as those other countries, I don't know what the deal is there.
So purse money versus factory sponsor money. So the factories and I say factory sponsor money because outside sponsors and factories pay most of the money and not so much the purse money.
Right. Well, I think it's great that a racer should be paid based on what he accomplishes, and where he finishes in that race. And if they did, I think you'd see maybe more of a commitment on some people's part. I don't know. Back when you raced, it was the purse money in comparison with what your sponsors was giving you was much greater, wasn't it?
Well, it ended up as a percentage. It was probably more with the purse money, but the purse money wasn't that good either. And then but you had to make money off of the factory, salary and bonuses and outside sponsors and whatnot. And the whole thing's gotten exponentially higher, but the purse money that they pay at races, if you think, how much the purse is, it's barely $1 a ticket, at a Supercross, for example. And that's, I still kind of have a bit of a problem with that. Something that is the next question is for the racers, because you've been around racers that were atop at a heap, in 30, 40 years ago. And now the younger guys, it seems like nobody had to worry back then about medical insurance because medical wasn't that expensive. Now, if you get hurt in a motocross, it'll bankrupt whatever dreams you had.
Yeah.
And which brings in where does the race organization fit in? Is it the promoter's responsibility to start creating a 401k or a pension fund or a, medical insurance fund that these guys can all participate in as a group and try to have some reasonable money?
Yeah, I think if you're a pro racer and you're out there doing that, there should be some organization formed, and whether it's from the AMA or whether it's from promoters themselves or whoever has to do this, I think there needs to be a fund put together for those guys. Danny Chandler should have had something like that. So it's not something new where, well, there are more injuries now because the tracks are more dangerous. There's been injuries and serious injuries like this for a long time, and why the industry as a whole can't get behind that. I mean, I don't know. And you know what? Maybe the manufacturers too.
Yeah, I'd like to see something. I'm not a big fan of unions, but
right.
This is the kind of one of the situations where unions were organized at the beginning, to prevent exploitation of workers, and it seems to me that this is a perfect example. And professional motocross races, for as big as it is the only one that doesn't have any kind of a true riders representation that I've seen that fights. I mean, every one of these kids gives up college. Some of them give up high school, which I completely disagree with. I don't agree with taking a GED. I think that you should go to school, period.
Yeah.
And at least through high school. And, but they all give up college. You can't attend college and be a professional motorcycle racer. And they're putting on a pretty good show. And a lot of people are making a hell of a lot of money for these guys not to have something, scholarship fund, medical, start a 401k, get some sort of a pension, what have you. But anyway, that maybe that's what you and I'll do here in next week, right?
Yeah. An Italian guy from Jersey running a union. What could possibly go?
Yeah. Well, they're building new stadiums. You don't want to be in the foundation, right? Like Jimmy.
So. That only happens in the movies, Warren.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, I want to go back a little bit to some of the riders, and you talked about becoming, friends. You met a lot of these guys, Tommy Croft and Marty Smith and Brad and everything. And one of the things that I've noticed with a lot of the top guys is, even if they're gruff type personalities or whether they're very friendly personalities, like the contrast between Marty Smith and Bob Hannah, they're all pretty engaging, and you'll hear their story, and you've gotten a lot of them, in there, and that again, not what surprised you in some of the interviews, but it's just the general personality of motocross racers, and what it takes to kind of be there, and how a lot of these guys have lived on long past their careers in the interest of people. And just kind of speak to that, if you would.
To speak about their personalities after their career.
After racing, and what their racer personality means afterwards, and just generally what type of a person was successful at motocross.
Right. Well, I think what I've seen throughout the years of becoming friends with so many of them is that they really do appreciate guys like you, guys like me, who keep the sport alive, whether it's the restoration guys or the people putting on the races, or like this great event that Keith Mashburn has put on here today, the Hopetown reunion. It really makes them feel special. And Warren, because you were part of that circle. So when you get out there and they ask you to sit down and sign autographs and do that's got to make you feel pretty good. So I think the golden era, the guys from the golden era, you being included, they're all really thrilled about still coming out and still being a part of it. It's nice that everybody remembers, the sacrifice that they made and how much they contributed to a sport that has changed direction in a lot of ways, but it was the foundation of the sport, and without them, we wouldn't have what we have today.
Yeah, it was a great sport, and and there's so many millions of stories out there of people that motocross gave them a direction.
Yes.
It me. I told my fifth grade teacher what I was going to do for a living, and when I met her in my 20s, she reminded me that I said in fifth grade what I was going to do for a living.
What did you tell her?
I told her I was going to race motorcycles.
Okay.
And so fast forward, 15 years later, when I went back to visit her, and she had seen me racing on TV. Whenever there's a motorcycle race on TV, she'd watch it. And then sure enough, there I was one day. And she anyway, and she reminded me what I said. I was like, oh, it was a great sport, and it still is. And it's cool to be a part of it. And I applaud you for what you've done to contribute to the greatness of the sport, reminding people how fun it is and how satisfying and fulfilling motocross at any level or any type, really is. So you didn't give me a time that we're supposed to run. I think we're kind of near the end there.
We've got some people watching. I'm not in any hurry. It's about 106 degrees out here in Simi Valley. I don't want to go out there for a little while yet. So if you've got a couple more questions or there's anything that you'd like to talk about, let's take the time to do it.
Okay, I'm going to ask specifically about Brad Lackey. So we and kind of his tenacity, but an easygoing guy to be as tenacious as he was. Now he chased his dream of being world champion for 10 years. He gave up a great career and probably multiple, national championships.
Sure.
To go to Europe and be low man on the totem pole and, live out of a van and, and take his wife, Lori sacrificed an incredible amount for him as well. In fact, if I can remember the details of it, Lori was on her way to go to a finishing school in Sweden after high school. And she said, no, I'm not doing that. And she and Brad packed up and went to Europe. Wow. Yeah. And their parents let her.
Yeah.
and her parents let her. Yeah. And I think what that probably speaks to is that for as wild and crazy as that sounds, when somebody has a passion like that, like Brad did, and they're so attached with their life mate, their soulmate, and Brad and Lori, that everybody, no matter how crazy it all sounds and seems, they all realize that this train is leaving the station, and you either better wave goodbye and wait for it to come back, or because it's not going to not leave the station. So, and that's kind of what I liken it to. And what were some of with Brad that he, and with your friendship with Brad and Lori, that I guess some events that stand out of their trip to Europe, some of the struggles, some of the high points and highlights.
Right. When he won a national championship for Kawasaki in '72, in his contract, it stated that he gets to go to Europe if he wins a national championship. So he wins in '72, but they don't want to send him to Europe in '73 because they want to sell motorcycles in America. But anyway, it's in the contract and they agree to send him there, but they don't really give him any factory support. They're giving him a bike, they're giving him some parts, but he's not getting everything he needs. So just at that point, the first couple of years while he was there, you're in a different country, you don't speak the language. The Europeans at that point are not really interested in helping the American guy. So it was a tough road to hoe for them, and they weren't getting the support that they had either been promised or thought that they would get by going there. I think when he went to Husqvarna, things got a little bit better as far as a bike goes. And some of the Euro guys took a liking to Brad, especially Roger. And, they love Americans in Belgium. And Roger just took a liking to Brad, and Roger and so many of the Belgium guys loved America. And a lot of it has to do with World War II and the Americans going over there and kicking ass against the Nazis and saving the country of Belgium.
Yeah, the Battle of the Bulge, right? That was in Belgium.
And so, Roger taking a liking to Brad helped Brad a lot. And Brad has talked about that in interviews that he's done. Roger helped him a lot through that time, because it wasn't a place for two 19-year-old or 18-year-old American kids to be, and, living out of a van trying to race a motorcycle. You need some real support there.
Yeah.
And Brad,
it's just across the board. Yeah. For example, Danny Laporte was a little bit different. Danny had a very eclectic racing career too. He raced, rally racing, and he was, Baja and everything. Very talented young man, and
right.
His career was a long time and took a lot of different directions. And still, whenever he throws a leg over a bike now, he's still fast. He's still competitive. And,
yes.
And if you would kind of speak to Danny with that, and then also the other guys that are still fast whenever they put a leg over a seat, like guys like Brock Glover and such, they show up, and Scott Burnworth, and they're fast. They're really fast. And just kind of speak to, I guess, if you would, that how to some of these guys have kept it going, and what seems to kind of be the motivator
when you take a Brock Glover or a Scott Burnworth, they physically stay in good shape, which has a lot to do with it. Now, the second part of it is, of course, there's a natural talent and a natural ability there. Somebody, how can I describe it to you, Warren? Sometimes no matter how much you practice, some guys just don't get better. And that goes for any sport. And it goes for anything. You could be a piano player, a baseball player, or a motorcycle racer. Some guys, no matter how much they practice, they're only going to be so good, and then that's going to be it. And sometimes that's enough, sometimes it isn't. When you have a natural ability to get on a bike, and you have that natural ability to keep yourself square with the handlebars, extend your foot out by the front axle, the balance, you know what it takes. You were a professional racer. Some guys still have that, and maybe their lap times are off compared to what it was 20 or 30 years ago, and naturally so. But their ability to go fast today at that time is still there. They're still able to go a whole lot faster than most other people. So there's that natural ability that when they get on that bike, they're at home. That's their stage. That's where they're comfortable.
One of the questions that I missed earlier, and this is kind of a segue back to motorcycles themselves,
sure.
And so many different types of motorcycles that produced by the Japanese and the European companies, and there are some designs and some just manufacturing techniques or engineering that really stand out, and you notice it when you're taking something apart and putting it back together, just the way a clutch basket is machined, or the way the way the shift mechanism works, or what have you. It's exceptional. And what are some of the ones that you saw from older bikes that seemed really exceptional for the time, especially for the time, even by today's standards?
A CZ. I mean, how well they were built, how smoothly the transmission worked, although it wasn't built like anything else where it had this shifter plate on top. It seemed agricultural in some way, and yet it worked flawlessly. So that's just one of the things that come to mind. I don't know. I think with the bikes that I work on that are between, let's say, 1968 and 1988, anything that's air cooled, there really isn't that much. There really isn't that much of a difference to say, wow, look at that. Maybe the first time I took apart a 75 YZ monoshock, when you take a look at that frame and how it was structured, how it was plated, and that was pretty amazing. Other than that, nothing really comes to mind. The simplicity of Mako is the first time I took one of those clutches apart with the Belleville washers. Yeah. And if there's not a spring in there and how that works, you look at it and you say, how does this work? It can't be this easy. But it does. And the Greaves I mentioned earlier with the Earl's front end and just the way the transmission was separate, a pre-unit thing, how the transmission was separate from the cylinder and the bottom end alone. That was pretty interesting. Other than that, I don't know. Things are.
Well, what was the Greaves like to ride?
I started it. I never rode it.
Oh, really?
No, I restored it. If you want to go ride it, that's your business. Because the last thing I want to do is start a bike and fall or something, get scratched or something like that. I want to deliver a bike that runs. If you want to ride it, that's your business.
What's currently in your shop right now getting restored?
A couple of Elsinores in there, 74s. Got an OSA Pioneer, 75 RM, 125M. That is long overdue, but we're getting really, really close on that. What else? Oh, I got a Bultaco Astro too. I'm not an Astro. It's a Persang, but it's an early boat tail Persang.
Oh, what they call that back fender? There was a name for those.
The boat tail.
Oh, okay.
It looked like a boat tail.
Yeah, like an upside down boat, like I was going to transom. That's right. So someday I want to have a Yamaha Mini Enduro, the original red tank with the white stripe and the white fenders with the red stripe.
Sure.
The JT 160. That was my first real motorcycle with a clutch. After having a lawnmower mini bike, I don't really count that Taco mini bike, but anyway, the Yamaha Mini Enduro was my life. So and that kind of set the pace. So.
And Warren, I was just thinking about something. You were asking me about the personalities of certain racers as I got to know them. It's incredible how patient they are with people who often will say the same thing. Or here, I'll give you an example. Whether it's Tommy Croft or I don't know, Jimmy Weinert, whomever, you can be in an event and there'll always be a guy that'll come up there and say, "Hey, remember the day you won at Redbud? I was there that day."
Yeah.
There's always that guy, and it was a special time in their lives, and that photograph is burned in their memory. But it's wonderful how gracious guys like Tommy are, or Jimmy Weinert, or of course Brad, including yourself, who take the time to make that guy feel special at that moment. The master of it all, the master was Jim Pomeroy.
Yeah,
I heard him tell. We raced a lot of ARMA Nationals, 2004, 2005, and in 2006 too. Shortly before he died in August, he could tell that story about winning that Grand Prix in Spain 50 times a day to 50 different people, and he will make you feel it's the first time he's told the story in 10 months.
Wow.
He was just so good at that and enjoyed being with the people and would answer that same question or talk about that same thing with such vigor and such a bright smile, that he just made everybody feel like they were a part of it. So
yeah, he was a great teammate when he came to Honda in '77. This is right after I signed, and that was. He and Brad and Marty and Tommy, I mean, the four of them all kind of took me under their wing and, let's go ride, let's go train, let's go do this, let's go up to Bishop and ride at Dave McCoy's house. Jim was a good friend of Dave McCoy, the guy that owned Mammoth Mountain, and, the Jill Kinmont's coach. She was the girl that depicted in the movie, The Other Side of the Mountain. And we had a great time up there training, and I learned from those guys how to have fun training hard. You saw with Pierre, how to train hard, but Pierre didn't have that much fun when he trained. Well, all those other guys had fun too, so I kind of got a little of both, worlds with, seeing how Pierre trained, and then, with Jim and Marty and those guys, it was
Sure.
invaluable and fun. All those guys are pretty fun guys.
Yep.
And again, that seems to be something that's, I don't know if it's unique to motocross, but it's certainly more broadly represented in the sport of motocross, because people get into motocross because it's fun at first. It's, it's not like a lot of other sports.
And you know what, you can ask just about any of them, and it kind of goes with today's group too. It's the family values, it's the family unit, whether it's a mom or a dad or hopefully both, taking a kid out to ride and build that relationship together, and teaching the kid what responsibility is, and the parents making time to be with the kid. So I mean, and any of those guys, whether it's, I know for a fact, whether it's Tommy or Marty or Brad's dad took him out to the desert, all of you guys started somewhere, and it was the mom or the dad that helped that grow, and you still see a lot of that today, which is a wonderful thing about the sport.
Yeah, the family taking the kids out to ride, and to ride together sometimes, or just to let the kid ride around a field. There was no umpires, there was no rule book. If you killed the engine, you started it. If you fell down, you got up. It's pretty plain.
And you know what? And growing up, every kid is not meant to be on a team. Every kid is not meant to hit or kick a ball. Sometimes they're just guys like us that want to be involved in a sport, but there's that individual, how can I say it? That individuality. You don't lose who you are. A lot of kids, whether it's a team sport, they kind of lose who they are, and they're just out there going through the motion. With motorcycles, it brings a completely different facet. To the kid's personality and to the parents too.
What I always said about motocross, what attracted me, and to a lot of individual sports, is that no coach or manager or nobody could decide whether I got to compete or not.
Right.
I'm the one that decided if I'm going to compete, and I decided on my strategy. When the gate drops, it's my strategy. It's not anybody else's. And I think that, a lot of, like, as you said, a lot of people aren't cut out for that whole team dynamic thing and everything. And maybe a team motocross, but a team of individuals, not, like everybody's competing against each other.
Yeah, but you know what, Warren, it, and I've heard a lot of other guys say it too. So it could be a Trans Am or a National or whatever, and you're in the same class as Steve Wise and Marty or Tommy or however you guys lined up back then. When that gate drops, I'm not saying the friendship stops. You're not going to take your teammate out, but it's you and the motorcycle and the track, and that's it. It's not about how many points you and Marty and Steve Wise all score, unless it's a donations race or something like that.
Yeah.
But
well, and you wouldn't necessarily take them out, but sometimes you might nudge them.
Well, that's
So I never could understand why some teams, some of the guys didn't get along, but that's, that I'm sure we know of examples where it's happened. We've seen it. I never really experienced it that much. I mean, there's some guys that wasn't like buddy, but right. You're not antagonistic toward each other, but I enjoyed when I saw it happen in other teams. I can tell you that I tried to use it to my advantage. Yeah. Maybe egg it on a little bit, whatever. Whatever. You know what that guy said? So it was fun. I'm kind of out of topics. Any particular thing? Well, there is a topic. What is the most important thing about your VMX radio and the Q&A and all the shows and the things it's pretty eclectic and broad. What's your most important part of that as far as your inspiration and satisfaction in doing shows and creating?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you, Warren. We all have a spiritual gift, and sometimes people can do different things. Their gift might be they can be a good leader. They can be a good manager. They can be good at delegating other people to do things. My spiritual gift is encouragement. I love to encourage people. So for the Q&A show, it gives me great satisfaction to be able to come on there and discuss how to do certain things, answer questions, show people how I do things, and not keep it such a secret about my techniques and what I do. And maybe there are guys out there who do the same thing that I do, but they do it in a different way. That's fine too. So what's important to me is that I can continue encouraging people through the Q&A show. And as far as this show, Vintage Motocross Radio, to keep the spirit of the sport alive, to keep the history of it recorded, to hopefully maybe have some of our shows fall on younger ears and make them want to know more about the history of motocross and how it's progressed. So that's what the two most important things are for me on those shows.
And I think that's what's led to the success of the shows too. And hey, keep it up and keep going. There's lots of guys have lots of comments all through here, and it's great to see everybody's really excited. With that, I'll say that I'll apologize for the people that wanted me to get a bunch of digs in, or that thought I was going to get real crazy. And I'll tell them I liken it to, I had two personalities. I had a pit personality, and I had the personality when I put my leg over the seat. When I put my leg over the seat, it was all business.
Sure.
And I tried to bring that to your show and keep it exciting, but not segue off into too much craziness. And so I'll get a little crazy later on. I got the whole afternoon in front of me, and I might even have some Italian food later tonight. And so I have to finish the last question. So red or white wine, what's my preferred wine with Italian food, or does it depend on what kind of Italian food I'm having? So
red with meat, white with fish.
Oh, the normal. Well, the normal. I thought it'd be something special if it was Italian. Nothing. Okay. Or what if okay. Well, maybe I'll have, veal parmesan and then maybe flounder or something like that, and so or clams and olive oil and garlic. So
I don't know. It's up to you. But whatever.
Well, hey, I thank you for letting me host and ask you all these questions and whatnot, and I really am happy for you getting to go around to the Hopetown Classic reunion and meeting a lot of those guys and seeing the bikes.
1 second, Warren, because somebody did send me a question the other day, and I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure how to answer it, but we're talking about food a lot here today, and we're talking about the restoration of motorcycles too. And somebody asked me about, do you consider yourself in the top 10 or top 5 best restorers? Do you do this? Who is the best? I'm going to say this about restoration guys, because there's a lot of good restoration guys out there. We're all like chefs. It's got a lot to do with food. You can give 5 of us, 1975 Elsinores that are all in pretty much the same condition, and you could send us all home to restore them. And we're all going to come back, and we're all going to have a different recipe. They're all going to be beautiful. And which one you like the best is, well, that's your chef. That's your guy. Yeah. So when it comes to that, I just I don't think about being the best, because I can think of people who that if I wanted to pay someone to restore a bike for me, I would probably go to them and have them do that for me. Don Miller comes to mind. Bill Mashell comes to mind. Billy West, who you're familiar with from the Yamaha days, Rick Burgett's mechanic. There's a lot of guys out there that are doing it, and they all serve it up a little bit different. And that's just how I look at it. So
that's a great analogy. So and there's a lot of good ways to prepare a dish, and they're not any the same. And and again, as you kind of spoke to earlier, it's the passion that the rider attaches to the motorcycle, and their life, their history, they're a certain point of their life, and that's it's almost like a portrait, painter, except you capture the essence of the person in the motorcycle, and not necessarily, it is their portrait. That motorcycle is their portrait. So, hey, you do a great job. So, with that, I want to remind everybody as we get ready to sign off to patronize again the great products from the Vintage Motocross Radio sponsor list. So they know moto, and that's why they sponsored Joe Abate's Vintage Motocross Radio. So thank you. And here they are, Motion Pro, specialized tools, cables, and controls. Vintco, keep the ride going. Full Circle Racing Limited, your one-stop shop for vintage and modern wheels. Our old buddy Preston Petty Products, the legend continues. The guy is a genius of never-ending bounds. Golden Products, the best fuel filter available for all types of motorcycles. Sunrise Vapor Blasting. I'm going to use them for something. I don't know what or when, but I'm going to use them. So Northwest Mako CZ. Again, our good friends at Racer X Magazine do so much to bring to the sport, and whether it's old or new. And a special thanks to Kevin Bridges, and again, his lovely wife, Penny, and the Dirt Diggers North Motorcycle Club. So until next week, this is Warren Reid signing off from Joe Abate's Vintage Motocross Radio.
Thanks, Warren.
Thank you.